Welcome back. We are continuing our discussion of Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. If you were able to join us earlier, Brittany was discussing what Gay means by bad feminist and the idea of bad feminism. So if you didn't get a chance to check it out, go ahead, head over there, join in the comment section, join in the discussion. She's also posted some questions to get everything going if you're not able to watch the video right now. This is our first Bonded Book Club read. So we are picking a few topics from the book. Obviously, we can't go through all of it. It is not a very big book, but there is so much in here. It is just dense with great discussion topics. I am going to be taking on, just briefly, what I think is one of the more challenging topics that Gay tackles in this book. And that is the idea of checking or acknowledging your privilege. And I think this is very difficult because being able to acknowledge your own privilege, one, requires a lot of self-reflection, which can be ego-busting and pride bruising, but also that it requires you to have proximity or knowledge of other people's situations, right? So there is this balance between privilege and oppression. And so if you're unaware of your privilege or don't even know that there is a different option than what you're experiencing, it can be very difficult to check yourself and acknowledge that. It is a difficult topic. It often requires us to get uncomfortable with where we are. I think Gay would agree with me, and I would venture to say that anyone who is watching this video right now is experiencing some kind of privilege. It can also be very challenging because we don't always ask for the privilege that we have. So it can be challenging or uncomfortable to want to take responsibility or ownership of that. For example, as it might seem quite obvious, I am white, which comes with a certain amount of white privilege, and whether or not that makes me happy, it is true and it is a fact. And so that comes with a certain set of benefits or privileges, and that's just something that is the reality of the world that we live in. And privilege comes in lots of different ways. There's race privilege, there's economic privilege, privilege of time even. You know, I got to go and participate in the Women's March, and it was amazing to be there, but it was a privilege that I was able to not have to work and take the time and the money to go and be a part of that event. So there's lots of different ways that privilege can show up, education, and different things like that. So the article or the essay that really kind of goes into this is called Peculiar Benefits, and it starts on page 15. I'm going to read a couple excerpts starting on page 16 and 17. I'm not reading straight through, so I'm jumping around a little bit, but you should be able to find them all there. And I'm just going to pull out some bits that I think will be really good to get our discussion started. So starting on page 16, Gay writes, "One of the hardest things I've ever had to do is accept and acknowledge my privilege. It's an ongoing project. My life has been far from perfect, but it's somewhat embarrassing for me to accept just how much privilege I have." She continues on page 17. "We tend to believe that accusations of privilege imply we have it easy, which we resent because life is hard for nearly everyone. Of course, we resent these accusations. To have privilege in one or more area does not mean that you are wholly privileged. Surrendering to the acceptance of privilege is difficult, but it is really all that is expected. What I remind myself regularly is this: the acknowledgement of privilege is not a denial of the ways I have been and am marginalized, the ways I have suffered. You don't necessarily have to do anything once you acknowledge your privilege. You don't have to apologize for it. You need to understand the extent of your privilege, the consequences of your privilege, and remain aware that people who are different from you move through and experience the world in ways you might never know anything about. They might endure situations you can never know anything about." And I think that last part to me is just one of the most poignant paragraphs, because it's this idea that you have to understand and acknowledge that you're not always going to be able to fully understand someone else's situation. Even if you want to empathize or sympathize with them, you may never actually be in their shoes because of your own privilege. She goes on in this essay to warn about participating in what she calls privilege and oppression Olympics, sort of this idea that you're too privileged, you can't speak on anything, or I am so oppressed, I'm only oppressed. And she goes into that in more depth in the pages that follow. But as Brittany did, we're going to do a little Q&A here just to kind of get the discussion started. And hopefully these are some like good juicy bits to get your minds going on the topic. And the first question I have is privilege something that you have thought about or critically examined in your own life before? And if you have, like, how do you go about it? And if you have not, what was your reaction to Gay's discussion in this essay? And did it get you thinking about it going forward? Is this something that you are now looking at and examining in your own life? For me, absolutely, this is something I have thought about, and it is something I still am working through. It's not like, oh, I know all my privilege and I've got this under control and I've checked it and I've acknowledged it and I can move on. It is a daily practice, and it is something that I have to remind myself of in multiple situations. Sorry, I'm talking. I can acknowledge my privilege in one moment and then find myself getting, especially in the political climate that we're in right now, when I feel so much rage and I want everyone to be where I am and feeling what I'm feeling in the moment with me. I have to remember that even my perspective is not everyone else's. And so I have to stop and say, what do I have that is a privilege that I need to check? Or is there something more I need to be aware of, another viewpoint, another experience of someone who doesn't have that same privilege that I need to be acknowledging before I move forward? And so I every day, reading helps a lot. Try to read about other people's experience because we don't always have physical proximity to people that are quite different from us. And that sometimes can, because of our privilege, of our economic status or our education level, we find ourselves in groups of like people, like experiences. So reading is a great way to reach out and find other experiences that can help you be more reflective thoughtfully. And the other question I have is, Gay makes this note here that you don't necessarily have to do anything once you've acknowledged your privilege, that is the biggest step, is acknowledging it. And I want to know if you agree with that that's really as far as you have to go. You just have to acknowledge it and check it. Personally, I don't know if I agree with her on that. I don't know that we can always do everything about every situation of privilege that we have or experience, but I do believe that we have, I think, a social moral obligation to use our privilege to help break down oppression, to help lift people into different situations. Whether or not I've asked for all of my privilege, in the situations that I have it, I believe that it is my responsibility to use it to do good, and to help make it more accessible to other people if possible. I know I'm not a religious person. I know that there are people that would say, they have a higher calling to do good, but in a religious sense. And to me, it's sort of like that. If I was religious, I feel a sense that I have a moral responsibility to my fellow citizens, humans, whatever they are. So once I acknowledge it, I don't believe that my job is done, which makes it even harder because I don't always know what I'm supposed to do with it. And that requires even more reflection and reading and education. And, like so many of these things in this book, it's about, you're not always going to get it right, but being open to critique and criticism, and taking that in and saying, okay, so I screwed it up, but I'm going to keep trying to do more with what I can. So I'd like to know your thoughts on it. There's not a right or wrong answer. Go ahead, join us in the comments section. We are going to be coming at you with a few more topics throughout the rest of the afternoon. We want to know what you thought about the book. I think it's great. I think she is such an easy to read writer, but really so thoughtful and thought-provoking. So can't wait to hear what you have to say, and I'll see you again later this afternoon. Brittany will be joining us again at 2 o'clock with her next topic. All right. Bye, everyone.